top 5 largest cities in the empire would be Vienna, Budapest, Prague, Zagreb, and Krakow. Despite the fact that there were dozens of languages spoken in the empire in 1914, the only official languages were German and Hungarian. This policy would likely continue today since these two languages would be the largest languages spoken within the country, with Hungarian being understood by 17.5% of the population and German by 16%, together adding to just over 1 out of every 3 people in the empire. But this would be very problematic for the other 2 out of every 3 people who wouldn't speak either language and would serve as another massive problem to keeping the country together. Czech would be the 3rd largest language, while Ukrainian and Russian would also be major languages understood by over 10% of the population. To just get to a point where 75% of the population could understand each other, you would have to go through 7 languages by also adding Romanian and Polish, since the population that speaks Ukrainian is also largely the same population that speaks Russian. The remaining 25% would be 6 other various languages, meaning that there would be 13 major languages spoken within the empire. All of this land and people would mean that the modern empire would have a GDP of $1.18 trillion, which would make the empire the world's 15th largest economy ahead of Mexico, but remaining just behind Spain, Australia, and Russia. This also means that the empire would have a respectable GDP per capita of $17,160, which would place it at the 39th highest in the world ahead of present-day Estonia and an independent Slovakia, but just behind Trinidad and Tobago and an independent Czech Republic. With a moderately powerful economy, the empire would also be estimated to have a modest military budget of $11.97 billion. This would be the 19th largest military budget in the world, ahead of Spain, but keeping behind the budgets of both Colombia and the United Arab Emirates. The imperial budget would be funding a military with 188,000 active-duty soldiers, the 30th largest military in the world, ahead of Germany and Syria, but remaining smaller than both Morocco and France. Pretty much all of the empire's territory would be located inside Europe, except for this tiny chunk of China less than 1 square kilometer in size in the city of Tianjin. Austria-Hungary occupied this tiny piece of land as sovereign territory briefly between 1901 and 1917 when it was returned to China. But since we're recreating the empire to exact borders in 1914, then this area would have to be returned. About 30,000 Chinese citizens living here would suddenly find themselves to be citizens of the Austro-Hungarian Empire as a result. As far as religion goes, Catholics would account for the majority of the population at 44.37% of the population, while Orthodox Christians would be the 2nd largest at 18.2%. Protestants would only be 4%, while Sunni Muslims would be just 3.3%. Austria-Hungary today would also have a very large atheist population, accounting for nearly 20% of the entire population, or nearly 1 out of every 5 people. Finally, we would have to settle on somebody to become the present-day emperor of the empire. This guy, named Otto von Habsburg, was the last crowned prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, born in 1912 as the son of the last real emperor. He didn't renounce his claim to the throne of Austria until 1961, and died somewhat recently in 2011 at the age of 98. His son, Karl von Habsburg, who is still alive today, therefore would likely become the emperor of this new empire, the direct grandson of the last reigning emperor in 1918. But would this empire actually be able to last very long with all of its difficulties, or would it collapse into the dustbin of history just like the old empire did in 1918? Leave your thoughts and comments below, and if you enjoyed what you just watched, I hope that you'll subscribe to my channel by clicking here. This topic over Austria-Hungary being reunited today was voted on directly by fans over at the official Real Life Lore Patreon, which you can go to by clicking here. There are new votes every month for a new Empire Reunited video, so if you'd like to get involved in that or just want to support the channel, then please go ahead and check that out. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you around next time.
Oh my god.
Really? They're made out of coffee?
They're really dry. I don't feel anything.
I mean, how is that even possible?
The year is 2017, and in November of this year, it will mark the 100th anniversary of the Communist Revolution in Russia. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, but what would the world be like if the USSR suddenly reunited today? What would the Soviet Union look like if it existed today in 2017? To begin, let's think about what countries today used to be a part of the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union reunited today, it would completely encompass the countries of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. This obviously would make the modern Soviet Union a very large country, since Russia alone has more land area than the entire surface area of Pluto. Together, the Soviet Union would be bigger than Australia, Antarctica, South America, the Arctic Ocean, and the Southern Ocean, which makes the Soviet Union larger than 3 continents, 2 oceans, and 1 former planet. There are 11 time zones that would go through the USSR, so that means that if it was noon here in this part of the country, it would be 11 p.m. over here on the other side of the country. The Soviet population would be a very large 294,837,000 people, which would place the Soviet Union in 4th place in terms of population behind the United States. This is interesting because the Soviet population in 1991 was almost the same as it would be now at 293,048,000 people, which shows just how greatly the population in the region has been stagnant recently. The American population at the same time in 1991 was 248,710,000 people, which was smaller than the Soviets. But in the time since, the American population has greatly increased to nearly 319 million people. A majority of the people living inside the USSR would be ethnic Russians at about 46% of the population, with sizable minorities of Ukrainians, Uzbeks, and over 100 other ethnic groups. Russian would be the dominant language of the state just as it was during the Soviet times, as 58% of the population would be capable of speaking and understanding it. Russian would likely be the sole official language within the country, and a return to communism would have to take place in order for a true recreation of the Soviet Union to be possible. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union would be the sole legal political party within the country and would possess a monopoly on power. A return to state-sponsored atheism would be enforced, where believers would be free to practice their faith in private or in designated religious buildings, but all public displays of religion outside of these designated areas would be forbidden. Despite this, however, the Soviet Union would still have a very large religious population, with only 12% of the modern population claiming to be atheist or non-religious. 54% would be Orthodox Christians, another 3% Catholic, 24% Sunni Muslims, 3% Shia Muslims, and a final 4% of multitude of other diverse religions. The capital city would be located in Moscow, the present capital of Russia and the largest city of the modern Soviet Union. To add up to the top 5 largest cities in the country, we would add St. Petersburg, which would be renamed back to Leningrad, as well as Kiev, Tashkent, and Minsk. The Soviet economy would be pretty large at $2.034 trillion US, placing it as the 8th largest economy in the world. Russia currently is the 12th largest world economy, so the Soviet Union would jump ahead of countries like South Korea and Canada but remain stuck behind India and France. The GDP per capita inside the country would be fairly low at just $6,899 per person, which would place the USSR all the way down at 76th place ahead of Bulgaria but behind China. This somewhat large economy would, however, greatly support the Soviet military with a budget of $80.4 billion US, the 4th largest budget in the world behind Saudi Arabia, China, and the United States. What the Soviets would lack in funds, however, they would make up for in sheer size with a force of 1,436,000 active duty soldiers, the 2nd highest number in the world behind China. But the USSR would have an additional 2,884,000 soldiers placed in reserves, giving the Soviet military a potential size of 4,320,000 soldiers in the event of mobilization, a force almost as large as the entire population of New Zealand. A fully mobilized Soviet military would be about the same size as a fully mobilized Chinese military, and would be 42% larger than a mobilized American military. The Soviets would also possess the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, with 7,300 warheads compared to just 6,970 American warheads. In addition, the USSR would be by far the largest oil-producing country in the world, outpacing both Saudi Arabia and the United States with a production of 12,966,000 barrels of oil every day. If we get a little more ambitious with this and decide to add all of the former territory that once belonged to the older Russian Empire into the modern Soviet Union, some interesting things begin to happen. To do this, we would add all of Finland, a very large chunk of Poland including the capital Warsaw, and all of Alaska. Doing this would raise the Soviet population up to 313,496,000 people, which would be nearly equal to the United States. Her GDP would be dramatically increased to $2.541 trillion US, now placing the USSR as the world's sixth largest economy, ahead of both India and France, but still remaining behind the United Kingdom and Germany. The added land would make the Super Soviet Union about the same size as the Mongol Empire was at its height. The difference in size between the two empires would only be an area about the size of Montenegro. All things considered, the Soviet Union likely wouldn't quite be the superpower that it once was. It would have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, the second largest conventional military in the world, and would be the world's largest producer of oil, but would be shackled by a struggling economy and a stagnant population growth. The United States and NATO would almost certainly be hostile to a